The morning they came to take my life away, I was in the middle of making persimmon jam. Not the store-bought kind that comes in little jars with someone else's recipe printed on the label. My own recipe, the one I developed over 40 years of autumns, adjusting the cinnamon just slightly each season, experimenting with the ratio of lemon to sugar, until it reached something so close to perfect that my neighbor Wulfric once told me it tasted like October had been bottled and sealed with wax. That was the morning. That was what I was doing when my daughter Thessaly knocked 3 times on my front door. Not the gentle knock of someone visiting, but the knock of someone who had already made up their mind about something. I wiped my hands on the apron I've had since 1987 and went to answer it. She wasn't alone. My son Calder was there too, standing slightly behind her, the way he used to stand behind furniture as a little boy when he was ashamed of something. And beside Calder was a woman I didn't recognize, young, professional, holding a leather folder against her chest like a shield. She introduced herself as someone from a place called Meadowbrook Gardens. I didn't catch her first name because I was still processing the fact that my children had brought a stranger to my home without calling first. "Mom," Thessaly said, and I already knew from the weight of that single syllable that this conversation had been rehearsed. "We need to talk." They came inside. I turned off the stove so the jam wouldn't burn. I offered everyone tea because that's what you do, and because I needed a moment to arrange my face into something neutral. The young woman from Meadowbrook Gardens declined the tea. Calder accepted, then held the mug without drinking from it. Thessaly sat at the edge of my kitchen chair, the way people sit when they don't intend to stay long. "We've been worried," Thessaly began, and then it all came out. The fall I'd taken on the porch steps back in February, which had been a single stumble, and I had caught myself on the railing, and there had been no injury whatsoever. The time Calder had called, and I hadn't answered, which was because I was in the garden and my phone was inside. The prescription that had been refilled late one month, which happened because the pharmacy changed their system and delayed everyone's orders, not just mine. They had assembled these ordinary moments of living and turned them into evidence. They had built a case. Meadowbrook Gardens, the young woman explained, was a wonderful community. She opened her leather folder. There were photographs of a dining room with round tables and cloth napkins. There was a photograph of a garden, small, neat, contained. There were photographs of women my age sitting in a semicircle in a sunlit room, and they were all smiling, and I couldn't tell whether those smiles were genuine or whether the photographer had simply waited. "We'd love for you to just come take a tour," she said, and I looked at my children. My daughter, who I had taught to read using the encyclopedia because we couldn't afford proper books. My son, who I had carried through 2 winters of pneumonia when he was 4 years old. And I understood something that I think they had not fully understood themselves. They were afraid. Not of me, not of anything I had done wrong. They were afraid of losing me, and they didn't know what to do with that fear, so they had organized it into folders and photographs, and a woman in a blazer sitting at my kitchen table. I told them I would think about it. After they left, I stood at the window and watched Calder's car pull out of the driveway. Then I went back to the stove, turned the heat on low, and finished my persimmon jam. but I did not stop thinking. Here is something people don't tell you about being 85. The world treats your age like a diagnosis. Strangers speak to you more slowly, as though time has thickened the space between words. Doctors look at your chart before they look at your face. Family members begin using a particular tone, gentle, careful, slightly elevated, the tone of someone managing a situation rather than talking to a person. And the assumption underneath all of it, the foundation that supports every concerned glance and carefully worded question, is this: that old means diminished, that the years have been taking things from you, and at some point, not enough will remain. I have lived 85 years on this earth, and I want to tell you what that actually means. It means I have made mistakes of a magnitude that would flatten most people, and I have gotten back up. It means I buried my husband Evander 14 years ago and learned, slowly and with tremendous difficulty, how to live inside a house that had been built for two. It means I raised 2 children largely on my own after Evander got sick the first time, working as a cartographer's assistant during the day and doing bookkeeping at night. And I made sure they never once felt the weight of what I was carrying. It means I have read more books than I can count, grown vegetables in soil that other people said was too rocky, learned to repair my own plumbing at 67 because the plumber's quote was absurd. And I have sat with friends in their final hours and held their hands and told them they were not alone. Old does not mean diminished. Old means you have been tested and you are still here. But that morning, after my children left, I did something I had not done in perhaps a decade. I walked through my house slowly, room by room, and I tried to see it the way they saw it. I looked at the stack of gardening books on the hallway table. I looked at the reading glasses I kept on a chain because I was forever losing them. I looked at the bathroom, at the tub I had to step over to get into, at the tiles I'd been meaning to replace since before the pandemic. I looked at the staircase, and I thought, all right, what is true? What was true was this: I was healthy. My mind was clear, sharper, honestly, than I gave it credit for. Because when you live alone, you are constantly solving problems, managing logistics, making decisions without anyone to help carry the cognitive load, and that is not nothing. My doctor had told me at my last appointment that my heart was functioning beautifully, and that she wished her other patients exercised as consistently as I did. I walked every morning. I cooked real food. I slept. But I also lived alone. And the staircase was real, and the bathtub lip was real. And the truth was that if something happened, if I fell, if I became ill, if there was an emergency at 2 a.m, it would be some time before anyone knew. That was the true thing underneath all of Thessaly's rehearsed sentences and Calder's borrowed courage. Not that I was losing my mind, not that I couldn't manage my own life, but that they lay awake at night imagining the version of events where something happened and no one was there. I understood that. I did not want to fight it. What I wanted to do was solve it. So I made a list, because I have always made lists. At the top of the list I wrote, "What does independence actually require?" And I sat with that question for 3 days. I called my friend Rosalind, who is 81 and has more sense than most people I've met at any age. I told her about the visit, about Meadowbrook Gardens, about the leather folder and the photographs of the smiling women. Rosalind was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "The question isn't whether you need help, Vermel. The question is what kind of help, and who gets to decide." Vermel. That's my name. I realize I should have introduced myself sooner, but I've been living inside this story so long, it didn't occur to me that you didn't already know me. My name is Vermel Ashcroft, and I have no intention of going anywhere. After I spoke with Rosalinda, I began to research. I am not a stranger to research. I spent decades as a cartographer's assistant, which is fundamentally the discipline of finding out exactly where things are and marking them accurately. And I applied that same discipline to this new terrain. What I found was more than I expected. I found that there is an entire world of home modification designed specifically for people who want to age in place. And it is nothing like what I imagined. I had pictured plastic grab bars and medical equipment, the visual language of hospitals brought home. What I found instead was thoughtful design, walk-in showers with beautiful tile, lever-style door handles in brushed brass that look more elegant than the round knobs they replace, lighting systems that adjust automatically, that respond to movement, that make navigating a dark hallway at 3 in the morning something entirely different than it was before. I found that many of these modifications are less expensive than a single month at Meadowbrook Gardens. I found personal emergency response systems that bear no resemblance to the large plastic pendants of years past. Small, discrete devices that can detect a fall without the wearer needing to press anything, that can be worn as a watch or carried in a pocket, that connect not just to emergency services, but to designated family members. I found meal delivery services that are nothing like the institutional trays I'd imagined, but instead are designed by actual chefs using actual ingredients, accommodating actual preferences. I found something called a village network, a community organization model in which older adults in a neighborhood form a mutual support structure, arranging transportation, sharing skills, checking in on each other, organizing social events. My city has one. It has existed for 11 years, and I did not know about it until a Tuesday morning in November, when I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my computer, and a determination to find out what my options actually were. I found, in other words, that the choice was not binary. No one had ever told me that. Vesely and Calder, in their fear, had drawn a line. On one side, home alone and vulnerable. On the other side, Meadowbrook Gardens and safety. But that line was false. The actual landscape was far more varied and interesting than the version they had presented, and I suspected, I believed, that they simply didn't know. That they had done what frightened people often do, which is grasp the first solution that presented itself and hold it tightly. I spent 2 weeks making a different kind of list. I called a contractor who specialized in aging-in-place modifications. His name was Oberon, and he arrived at my house with a measuring tape and a genuine interest in the problem. And he walked through every room with me, and we talked about what mattered. The bathroom first, a curbless shower, new lighting, a different configuration for the vanity. The staircase, a rail on both sides, better lighting on the landing. The kitchen, small adjustments to the heights of certain things, better organization for the things I used most often. The total cost was significant, but not impossible. I have lived carefully. Evander and I made decisions across decades that our younger selves sometimes resented. The vacations we didn't take, the cars we didn't upgrade, because we believed that the future was worth protecting. That careful living had left me with options, and I was grateful for it, in a way I couldn't have been when I was younger. Because you can't be grateful for a thing until you understand what it's for. I joined the Village Network. I went to my first meeting on a Thursday evening in a church hall and sat next to a woman named Isadora, who was 88 and had recently completed a memoir. We talked for 2 hours and agreed to have lunch. On the way home, I thought about how long it had been since I'd met someone new and felt immediately that we would be friends. And I thought that Meadowbrook Gardens, whatever its merits, could not have given me that particular evening. I set up the emergency response system. I chose one that my doctor's office recommended, and it was nothing like what I feared. I wore it for a week before I forgot I was wearing it, which was, I suppose, the point. I tested it twice. It worked both times. And then I called my children. I asked them to come for dinner on a Sunday, and I cooked the kind of meal that required real effort. A roast with root vegetables, bread from scratch, the persimmon jam from that first morning opened and placed on the table in a small dish. I set the table with the good linens. I lit the candles Evander had bought in Portugal 30 years ago that I had always been saving for a special occasion, and I thought, this is a special occasion. This is the evening I tell my children who I am. They arrived with the same energy they'd brought to that first morning. Careful, braced, expecting difficulty. Calder had his hands in his pockets. Thessaly was holding a bottle of wine, and her smile was slightly too wide. We ate first. I insisted. There are things better said on a full stomach. And then, over the persimmon jam and the last of the bread, I talked. I told them about Oberon and the modifications, which were already underway. I showed them photographs on my phone. I told them about the Village Network and about Isadora, and Thessaly looked genuinely surprised because she had not known such organizations existed. I showed them the emergency response system. I explained exactly how it worked, what it detected, who it contacted, in what order. I told them I understood why they were afraid. I told them that I was not angry about the visit, about the leather folder, about Meadowbrook Gardens. I told them that fear for someone you love is not a character flaw. It is simply what love looks like when it runs out of ideas. And then I told them something I had been forming in my mind since that first Tuesday morning with my tea and my computer and my list. I said, I have been alive for 85 years. I have navigated things that had no roadmap. I have made decisions with incomplete information in difficult circumstances, and I have done it well enough that you both grew up and became people I admire. I would like you to trust, not blindly, not without verification, but genuinely trust that I have the capacity to evaluate my own situation and respond to it appropriately. I would like you to be my partners in this, rather than my managers. I would like you to call me and ask how things are going, rather than arriving with professionals. I would like us to face this together, which is different from you solving it for me." Calder started crying, which surprised me because Calder has not cried in front of me since he was 11 years old. He apologized. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. Thessaly reached across the table and took my hand and held it with the same grip she had as a small child, fingers wrapped around mine, trusting the grip to mean everything it couldn't say out loud. We stayed at the table for 3 hours. We talked about Evander. We talked about a summer we'd spent at a lake house when the children were small, a summer I had almost forgotten, and Calder remembered details I didn't: the color of the rowboat, the name of the dog that belonged to the family next door. We laughed about things I hadn't laughed about in years. When they left that night, Thessaly hugged me at the door for a long time and said, "I didn't know about the Village Network thing. That's actually really cool." And I said, "There's a lot we don't know until we look." She nodded, and I could see her filing that away, and I thought, good. That's what I want for you. Keep looking. It has been 4 months since that Sunday dinner. Oberon finished the bathroom 2 weeks after we broke ground, and the new shower is genuinely beautiful. A soft gray tile, a teak bench, a rainfall showerhead that makes every morning feel like something worth getting up for. The staircase rails are dark bronze and look as though they belonged there from the beginning. I see Isadora most Thursdays. She brought me 3 chapters of her memoir last week, and I gave her my most honest response, which she claimed to appreciate, though I think she liked the sections I praised more than the sections I questioned. We are working through that. I walk every morning. I cook my own food. I finished the persimmon jam and started a new batch with the last of the season's fruit. And I adjusted the cinnamon again just slightly because every autumn calls for its own interpretation. My children call more than they used to, not with the careful, managed tone of before, just to talk. Calder called last Tuesday to tell me about a problem he was having at work and wanted my opinion, and I gave it to him, and he said it was helpful, and I thought, yes, that is the relationship I want. Not managed and careful, but real and reciprocal. I am still here, in my house, in my kitchen, in my life, and I am not finished. If you are watching this, and you are somewhere in this story, if you are the older person whose children are beginning to look at you with that particular carefulness, or if you are the adult child lying awake at night with a fear you don't know how to carry, I want you to hear this. The conversation you need to have is not the one most people have. It is not about facilities and folders and what happens when. It is about trust and partnership and what it actually means to care for someone. It is about looking honestly at a situation together and asking not who decides, but how do we solve this as people who love each other. That is the conversation worth having, and it is worth having before a crisis forces your hand, before fear drives the agenda, before someone who loves you arrives at your door having already decided. Start with curiosity rather than conclusions. Look at what actually exists before deciding what the only options are. Talk about the real things, the fear, the love, the grief of watching time move, the complicated dignity of needing help, and the complicated love of wanting to provide it. Those conversations are not easy, but they are so much better than the alternative. If this story meant something to you, if it gave you something useful to bring to a person you love or a situation you are navigating, I would ask one thing. Subscribe to this channel so that when I share more of these stories about living fully, about the long work of building a life that holds, you'll be here for it. You have no idea how much good is still ahead. My persimmon jam says so. And after 85 years, I have learned to trust it.